The collapse, when the world you built disappears. There comes a moment in every human life when the world stops making sense. It doesn't arrive with a grand announcement or thunderous warning. It happens quietly, like a breath caught in your throat. One day you wake up and realize that everything you built, everything you depended on, is gone. The job that once defined your purpose, the relationship that gave you stability, the beliefs that made you feel safe, they collapse one by one until all that remains is the echo of what used to be you. There's a particular kind of silence that follows such a collapse. It isn't peaceful, it's the silence of absence, a vacuum where meaning used to live. The air feels heavier, the walls look different, even your reflection seems like a stranger's face staring back. You begin to realize that what you lost wasn't just things or people or status. What you lost was the story, the narrative that told you who you were. For years, perhaps decades, you believed that the things you owned, the people who loved you, the opinions others held about you, were all proof of your worth. But when they vanish, a haunting question rises from the ruins. Who am I without them? This is the point where most people break, because losing everything doesn't just take away comfort, it takes away certainty. And the human mind is addicted to certainty. We cling to it like a drowning man clings to driftwood. But here's the paradox. What we call stability is often just an illusion. The structures we trust, careers, relationships, identities, are fragile scaffolds built on shifting ground. When they fall, they don't destroy us, they expose us. History and myth have always known this truth. The story of Job, who lost everything yet found faith in the ashes. The phoenix, burned to dust before it could rise. Nietzsche's self-overcoming, the death of the old self so that the higher self may emerge. In every age, the collapse precedes transformation. The fall is not the failure, it is the initiation. But when it happens to you, it doesn't feel like transformation. It feels like dying. You try to bargain with the loss, to rebuild the illusion, to find a reason. Yet the more you grasp, the more it slips through your fingers. The mind begins to panic, searching for something solid in a world that has turned to smoke. And yet, beneath that chaos, something remarkable begins to stir. In the ruins of the old life, there is a stillness, a raw awareness, untouched by success or failure. It has no name, no history, no status. It simply is. Most people never meet this part of themselves because they spend their lives protecting the illusion. But when everything else is taken, you are finally introduced to what cannot be destroyed. This is the hidden strength that collapse reveals, a strength not built on achievement, validation, or hope, but on acceptance. When you've lost everything, there's nothing left to defend. You stop pretending, you stop performing, you stop fearing what might go wrong because everything has already gone wrong and you're still here. In that realization lies an unexpected freedom, a quiet, defiant kind of power, the kind that can't be given or taken away, the kind that can't be threatened because it has already survived annihilation. So when the world you built disappears, it isn't the end of the story, it's the beginning of the one that's finally real, because what's left after everything is gone is who you truly are. The psychology of ruin, why we fear losing everything. The fear of losing everything is older than civilization itself. It lives deep in our bones, hidden beneath centuries of evolution, a primal instinct that whispers, without safety, you will not survive. Every human life whether humble or powerful, is built on this invisible bargain. We exchange freedom for security, truth for comfort, and authenticity for acceptance. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to cling to people, to possessions, to beliefs. As children, we learn that belonging equals safety. As adults, we expand that need into every corner of existence. Careers, reputations, digital identities. We call it ambition, but much of it is fear. Fear of vanishing, of being unseen, of becoming no one. Psychologically, this fear has a name. Carl Jung called it the death of the persona, the collapse of the mask we present to the world. Over time, we forget that the mask was ever a mask. We believe it is who we are. Our titles, our success, our relationships become extensions of the self. And so, when they fall apart, it feels like we are dying with them. But the truth is far stranger. What we call loss is often the destruction of illusion, the breaking of the story that kept us comfortable but small. The mind resists this breaking because it confuses familiarity with truth. It would rather live inside a beautiful lie than face the chaos of the unknown. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps, once wrote that when a man's meaning collapses, he collapses with it. The real danger of loss is not the absence of things, but the absence of meaning. Our sense of identity is built on purpose, on the belief that our lives fit into a coherent narrative. When that narrative shatters, the self dissolves. That is why people often describe deep loss as falling apart, because that's exactly what's happening. The story of the self is unraveling. In the modern world, this process has become more subtle but more pervasive. Our sense of worth is no longer tied only to physical possessions, but to invisible currencies: attention, reputation, approval. We live in a culture that measures existence through metrics: followers, likes, income, influence. And because those measures are unstable, so are we. The loss of digital validation can trigger the same biochemical fear response as losing a home or relationship. The body doesn't know the difference. The ego only knows the feeling, I am disappearing. Yet beneath this fear lies an extraordinary truth, the same truth that spiritual and philosophical traditions have repeated for millennia. You were never your possessions, your titles, or your image. They were roles, temporary costumes worn by consciousness. But we become addicted to them, and like all addictions, withdrawal feels like death. Ernest Becker, in The Denial of Death, argued that much of human civilization is a defense mechanism against this fear. We build systems of belief, religion, nationalism, ideology, to protect ourselves from the terror of insignificance. But the irony is that these structures also imprison us. The more we try to protect the self, the more fragile it becomes. To lose everything, then, is to face the ultimate psychological confrontation, to stand before the void with no mask, no armor, no narrative. And though it feels unbearable, it is also the moment where authenticity begins. The ego dies, but awareness remains, pure, formless, unconditioned. When we understand this, loss ceases to be an enemy. It becomes a teacher, a ruthless one, but honest. It shows us the parts of ourselves that were built on illusion. It reveals how much of our so-called strength was just fear in disguise. The fear of losing everything will always live within us. It's part of being human, but it is only by facing that fear that we discover what cannot be lost. The part of us that watches everything fall apart and still says, I am here, because beneath every collapse, Beneath every broken dream and shattered image, there is something untouched. The quiet, unshakable center of being. And when the dust of illusion finally settles, that's where we find ourselves again. The void, meeting nothingness, face to face. After the collapse, there is quiet, not the kind that soothes, but the kind that unsettles, a silence that hums with absence. You wake in the morning and for a moment forget what's gone. Then the memory rushes back like cold air through a broken window. There is no plan now, no structure, no direction, just the endless stretch of what once terrified you most, nothingness. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this space. We drown it in noise, work, entertainment, or faith. We convince ourselves that as long as we stay busy, we will never have to meet it. But the moment all distractions are stripped away, we come face to face with it, the void that exists not outside of us, but within us. This is the territory of existential philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre called it nausea, the raw realization that existence has no inherent meaning. Camus described it as the absurd, the clash between our desire for purpose and the universe's silence. When we lose everything, we are forced to see what they saw, that life offers no guarantees, no cosmic order promising justice or reward. We are standing in a universe that owes us nothing, and yet in that realization lies the seed of awakening. Because when meaning collapses, what's left is not pure emptiness, but pure possibility. The void is not a punishment, it's a blank page. It strips us of every illusion, leaving only the raw material of being. Heidegger called this encounter the call of being, a moment when all external identities vanish and we are left exposed to the mystery of existence itself. It is frightening because it demands responsibility. Without the comfort of systems or beliefs, you become the author of meaning. There is no one left to tell you who to be, what to want, or how to live. That is both the terror and the freedom of the void. But this confrontation is not merely philosophical. It is emotional, visceral. The mind rebels. It searches for a way out, a belief to cling to, a narrative to rebuild, anything to fill the silence. Yet if you can resist the urge to escape, if you can simply stay in that emptiness, something begins to change. The fear starts to dissolve, the panic fades, and beneath the chaos, a strange peace appears. Not the peace of answers, but the peace of presence. You begin to see that nothing is not the absence of life. It is life before we name it. It is consciousness unfiltered, reality without decoration. Mystics across traditions have described this state for centuries. In Zen, it is the great death, the dissolution of ego that precedes enlightenment. In Christianity, it echoes through the dark night of the soul, where the believer feels abandoned by God only to discover the divine within. The patterns differ, but the essence remains. Through nothingness, we encounter what is real. When everything you were collapses, the void is the place where you begin again, not by rebuilding what was lost, but by realizing you no longer need it. It's where desire loses its grip, where fear loses its teeth. For the first time, you are not defined by what you have, what you do, or what others think. You are simply aware, stripped, awake, alive. And though this state may not last forever, its imprint never fades. Once you've met the void, you understand that it isn't your enemy, it's your reflection, the mirror of what you've always been beneath the noise. Boundless, empty, infinite. To meet nothingness face to face is to discover that the nothing you feared was never nothing at all. It was freedom. Historical echoes, those who were reborn from ruin. When we speak of losing everything, it can sound abstract, a poetic metaphor for personal struggle. But history is full of people, nations and civilizations that have lived this collapse in reality. To understand the strength that comes from ruin, we must look to those who have walked through fire and emerged changed, not despite their loss, but because of it. Friedrich Nietzsche was one of them. In his final years, he lost everything that defined him: his health, his sanity, his reputation. Once a professor celebrated for his intellect, he descended into madness, isolated from the very world he had tried to awaken. Yet it was within that isolation that his most enduring idea took form: amor fati, the love of fate, the belief that to live fully, one must not only accept suffering but embrace it as necessary, even sacred. Nietzsche understood that strength does not come from avoiding collapse, but from integrating it, from saying yes to life, even when life breaks you. Centuries earlier, Marcus Aurelius faced his own form of ruin. As emperor of Rome, he watched his empire crumble under plague, war, and betrayal. Surrounded by chaos, he could have surrendered to despair. Instead, he turned inward, writing meditations, private reflections that would outlive his empire. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. In his losses, he found clarity. He learned that power, status, and control are illusions. Only inner strength endures. And then there are those whose collapse was not personal but collective. Japan, after World War II, stood in ashes. 2 cities annihilated, millions dead, its national identity, pride, culture, economy obliterated. Yet within a generation, it rebuilt itself into a symbol of discipline, innovation, and artistic minimalism. From destruction, Japan learned the value of simplicity, precision, and humility. It became stronger not by reclaiming what was lost, but by reinventing what it meant to exist. In art, too, ruin has always been a birthplace. Vincent van Gogh died in poverty, his work unrecognized, his mind tormented. But it was through that torment that his vision deepened, colors burned brighter, forms became more alive. His suffering stripped away the conventions of his time and revealed raw humanity on canvas. Beethoven, nearly deaf, composed his greatest symphonies when he could no longer hear them. What both men lost, sound, recognition, peace, became the soil of genius. History repeats this truth in every era. The Black Death decimated Europe, yet from its ashes came the Renaissance, a cultural rebirth that redefined art, science, and humanism. The Great Depression destroyed lives and livelihoods, yet it gave birth to innovations, social movements, and thinkers who reshaped modern society. Collapse, it seems, is not merely destruction. It is nature's way of forcing renewal. But not everyone survives it. For every Nietzsche or Aurelius, there are countless others who could not bear the void, those who mistook collapse for ending instead of initiation. The difference lies not in strength or intelligence, but in perspective. Some see ruin as punishment, others see it as transformation. The lesson these figures leave behind is neither romantic nor comforting. It is brutal, but true. Everything you love can and will be taken from you. The only question is what will remain when it is. For some, loss is the end of meaning. For others, it is the beginning of authenticity. Those who rebuild from ruin do not simply return to what was. They become something new, something untouchable. Every age produces its phoenixes. Every collapse conceals a seed. The great paradox of existence is that creation and destruction are not opposites. They are partners. To live fully is to accept that everything you build will one day fall. But to live wisely is to know that from the ruins, you can build something that no fire can touch. And perhaps that is the true inheritance of history, not the monuments or empires we leave behind, but the understanding that strength is born only in those who have learned to lose. The reconstruction, rebuilding without illusion. After destruction comes a strange calm, not comfort, but clarity. The storm has passed. The noise has faded, and what's left is the quiet, undeniable truth. You are still here. What remains now is not a return to what was, but a reconstruction of what can be. A rebuilding not based on illusion, but on essence. This is where the journey turns inward. In the aftermath of loss, there is a temptation to rebuild quickly, to fill the void, to restore normalcy, to return to the old rhythm of existence. But that rhythm is gone. The person who lived in that world no longer exists. And so, true reconstruction cannot mean recreating the past. It must mean creating from truth. Psychologically, this is the moment when the ego, humbled and stripped, begins to rebuild, not out of fear, but awareness. Viktor Frankl wrote that those who survived the camps were not the strongest, but the ones who found meaning, even in suffering. They rebuilt their inner world first. They discovered that freedom begins not when circumstances change, but when perception does. The same principle applies here. After losing everything, we begin to see that the foundation of strength is not control, but surrender, not dominance, but understanding. To rebuild without illusion means to stop defining yourself by external things. It means accepting that pain, uncertainty, and impermanence are not enemies, but companions in the human story. This is where Stoicism and existentialism meet. Both teach that meaning is not found, but created. Marcus Aurelius rebuilt his mind daily through reflection and discipline. Frankl built his through purpose. Nietzsche, even in madness, built his through defiance. Each learned that the world can collapse, but the self, the conscious, aware, evolving self, can always begin again. To rebuild without illusion is to understand the difference between strength and numbness. Numbness closes the heart to avoid pain. Strength opens it despite the pain. One is a wall, the other is a foundation. In practice, this kind of reconstruction looks simple, almost invisible. It's in the person who starts again after failure, not with bitterness but with humility. It's in the individual who stops pretending, who no longer chases validation or applause, but lives quietly and deliberately. It's in the acceptance that everything can end, and yet choosing to love, to create, to try again. You begin to rebuild not by collecting what was lost, but by nurturing what cannot be taken. Integrity, awareness, resilience, presence. You learn that simplicity is not emptiness but strength in its purest form. What once felt like absence now feels like space. Space to breathe, to move, to live honestly. This phase of reconstruction is not about triumph. It's about integration. The pain remains, but it no longer defines you. The loss still echoes, but it no longer imprisons you. You carry it not as a wound, but as a weight that has shaped you. You learn that wholeness does not mean being unbroken. It means being complete because of what was broken. And slowly you start to see that losing everything was never the end. It was a brutal teacher, yes, but also a liberator. It stripped away the lies that kept you afraid, the attachments that kept you small, the illusions that kept you asleep. You realize that the old world had to die for something real to be born. And now, standing amid the quiet remains, You are finally free to build something that will not fall so easily, because it will not depend on circumstance, but on truth. This is what it means to rebuild without illusion, to rise not as who you were, but as who you truly are. The modern paradox, why we are terrified of true freedom. We live in an age that celebrates freedom, yet few of us have ever truly felt it. The modern world is built on the illusion of choice, abundance, and control. We can change jobs, relationships, identities, even digital selves with a swipe or a click, and yet beneath the glitter of autonomy, there lingers an unspoken truth. We are more afraid of real freedom than ever before, because real freedom has a cost, the cost of losing everything that once told us who we are. We have constructed a civilization designed to protect us from collapse. Every app, system, and belief promises safety, convenience, predictability. We no longer face hunger, solitude, or silence the way our ancestors did. We have banished uncertainty, and in doing so, we have banished depth. Our comforts have made us secure, but also dependent. We no longer need to be strong, so we have forgotten how to be. The irony is almost cruel. The more control we gain, the more fragile we become. A single rejection, a lost job, a critical comment online, and our carefully curated selves begin to crumble. We've built identities not from who we are, but from what others reflect back to us. We no longer fear losing possessions, we fear losing perception. Social media, consumerism, and constant distraction have created a new kind of prison, one lined not with walls but with validation. Every like, every follower, every purchase whispers, "You exist, you matter," but behind that whisper is a quiet threat. Without us, you are nothing, and so we cling to images, routines, and ideologies, mistaking comfort for stability. But true freedom, the kind discovered in the ashes of collapse, cannot coexist with attachment. It demands that we face life without guarantees. It demands that we stop outsourcing meaning to systems and screens and begin to create it within ourselves. Philosophers warned of this long before our digital age. Kierkegaard wrote that anxiety is the dizziness of freedom, the terror of realizing that nothing prevents us from becoming anyone, doing anything, destroying everything. That infinite possibility feels like chaos to the modern mind, trained to seek order and assurance. And so, instead of embracing freedom, we run from it into distraction, ideology, and obedience. Our fear of loss is really our fear of freedom, because freedom strips away excuses. It reveals that the barriers between who we are and who we could be were never real. They were comfortable illusions, and without them, we stand alone, face to face with responsibility, no longer victims of circumstance, no longer protected by systems, just ourselves, raw and unguarded. This is why societies, no matter how advanced, subtly discourage true independence. A person who needs nothing is difficult to manipulate. A person who has faced ruin and learned to live without illusion cannot be controlled through fear or promise. And that, perhaps, is the greatest threat to any system built on dependency. So we remain trapped, not by oppression, but by comfort. We trade our strength for ease, our authenticity for approval, our freedom for the illusion of safety. But beneath the surface, something ancient still stirs, a quiet longing to break free from the digital noise and remember what it means to stand alone, to live without armor, without performance, without guarantees. The modern paradox is that in trying to avoid collapse, We have built a world too weak to survive it, and perhaps the only way back to true freedom, the kind unshaken by loss, is through the very thing we fear most, letting it all fall apart. The dangerous gift, rebirth after destruction. There comes a point, after the dust settles, after the panic fades, when something unexpected begins to stir in the ruins. It isn't comfort, it isn't happiness, it's clarity, the kind of clarity that only arrives once there is nothing left to protect. When a person loses everything, they no longer live under the tyranny of what if. There is nothing left to fear because the worst has already happened, and from that void, an almost paradoxical strength emerges. You begin to see the truth that the world conceals from the comfortable, that freedom is not in gaining more, but in needing less. The ancients understood this. In Greek mythology, Heracles was forced to burn away his mortal body to become divine. In Hindu philosophy, Shiva destroys so that creation can begin anew. Even in Christianity, resurrection follows crucifixion. Across civilizations and centuries, the same law repeats. Rebirth requires destruction. The self that survives the fire is never the same as the one that entered it. Psychologically, this is not just a metaphor. It's a transformation. When a person's identity collapses, their brain is forced to rewire. Old attachments, fears, and narratives lose power. What once defined them, status, possessions, validation, becomes irrelevant. They begin to rebuild not from external approval, but from internal truth. The ego, once the architect of illusion, becomes the servant of awareness. But this rebirth is not glorious. It is not cinematic. It is slow, quiet, and often painful. It feels like learning to walk again, naked before the world. There are no applause, no witnesses, no assurances, only the raw experience of existence, unfiltered, unmasked. And yet it is precisely this nakedness that gives birth to invincibility. Because a person who has nothing left to lose becomes untouchable. They can no longer be bribed with comfort, nor controlled through fear. They have discovered the one form of strength that cannot be taken, the strength that comes from surrendering everything that was never truly theirs. Philosopher Alan Watts once said, "To hold your breath is to lose your breath." In other words, the harder we cling to control, the faster we suffocate. True resilience, then, is not resistance, it is release, the power to let go of what collapses and trust that something deeper will take its place. This is the dangerous gift that society doesn't celebrate, because a person reborn from destruction no longer plays by the rules that maintain the illusion of safety. They see through the manipulation of fear, through the false promises of progress. They understand that meaning is not granted by systems or gods. It is created through the act of survival itself. And when you reach that point, when you've stared into the abyss and found not despair but stillness, you realize that losing everything was not the end of your story. It was the beginning. You stop asking, "How do I get my life back?" and instead begin to wonder, "What was I ever clinging to?" You stop chasing identity and start embodying truth. You stop fearing death because you've already experienced it, not in the body, but in the ego, and in that death, you find something immortal, a quiet, unshakable strength that no one can give you and no one can take away. This is the paradox of loss, that what feels like the end is often the moment of true beginning. Collapse is not failure, it is initiation. The fire was never there to destroy you, it was there to reveal what was real enough to survive it.